All right, Sam, I'm so excited to have you on today. We are going live to talk Legal 101. For anyone that hasn't joined us on any of these lives before, and if you're on Facebook, there is a link that's going to say, let StreamYard know who you are. That way, if you comment, we can actually see your name and your face. And if you are joining us, I would love you to comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Hey, Debbie, I know you're tuning in from Chicago. Thanks for tuning in. But we're really excited. Sam, I'm really excited about this topic because I get asked this, I think, more than anything else, which is, what are the legal things I need to start my own business? But you're going to give us a little legal disclaimer first.
Yeah, I have to do my lawyerly due diligence and duty here and say this is not legal advice. Do not take this as legal advice. My conversation right now with Rachel does not form an attorney-client relationship with any of you out there in the internet land, and definitely consult an attorney before acting on anything that I recommend or mention in this webinar.
Perfect. I always have to give my little, you'd be proud of the legal disclaimer I give in my webinar, Sam. I feel like I haven't had you actually look at it, which I probably should, but that's a separate topic.
Well, I obviously wing mine too, so it's all good.
I love it. Well, you're my business attorney, but I wanted you to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you named your firm Better.
Yeah.
And why you aren't, Harvey Specter in New York in a high-rise, like taking over the world. And if you don't know who Harvey Specter is, he's on Suits, which is a show you should just actually stop watching right now and go to Amazon Prime and start watching that. And then you'll probably get some info.
I don't know, maybe stay tuned in here. But yeah, so my law firm, Better, we started it actually on March 1st, interesting date to start it this year. And the reason that it's called Better is that myself personally, my associate attorney, basically any staff that we ever have at my law firm, we really believe about being better every day, helping others be better every day, and even more than those, that we're all better together. And so it's something that I think represents us, represents our brand, represents what we do for our clients. And really what that boils down to is that for nonprofits, small business and startups, freelancers, solopreneurs, we help from A to Z. So if that means starting your business, helping with your contracts, your intellectual property, your governance, your hiring, your firing. We screen documentary films for fair use offenses. We help people shut things down. We do virtually everything that you can need. And if we don't handle it, we do have other service providers that we trust that we can send you to. And this is actually a successor to my previous law firm, Maz, that did a lot of similar things, but was a little bit more hipster and a little bit less empowerment focused.
Well, I love both of your brands. I've known you for a while, but I love that because, and one of the things I loved about why you named your firm Better also is because you are all about community engagement, making sure that you're out there doing things like this for free, doing community workshops. And so I'm really glad you're here, and I'm glad you're here to serve our audience. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, we're pretty insistent on all this stuff being for free because we want to make sure we get any of the knowledge and information that we have out there.
I love it. I love it. And especially I think for solopreneurs and freelancers who are just starting, and there's a lot of unknown costs already. So it's nice to have some of this advice. I know I didn't have any of it when I started, and that's why I'm so passionate about sharing it now. From a legal standpoint, when someone is starting a new business, even if it's what I do, marketing consulting, solopreneur business, what are the areas of protection from a legal standpoint we should be looking at?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a simplification. There's a whole bunch of stuff between the lines, but the thing that I always use, some imagery that I think is helpful for this stage of a business, is going to be the 3 lines of defense. And so when I say this, I mean defending against your personal assets from being liable for the business that you're out there doing. And so those 3 lines are going to be sort of in chronological order of how they would come up if there were a disagreement or a legal dispute. First is going to be a contract. So having some type of contract or agreement in place with literally anyone that services or money exchanges hands. So your clients, your partners, your vendors, anybody that's going to happen, have that agreement in place. Clearly lays out expectations, hopefully dictates how a dispute would go. Obviously, though, contracts, there's such a thing as breach of contract. And so people might ignore the contract, say that you breached the contract. And so if that line of defense is sort of defeated, or they hop over that one, then the second one is going to be insurance. Always good to talk to an insurance broker or agent. and just get a general liability policy, or if there are specific policies to your industry or what you're doing, make sure to have that in place. Now, of course, with insurance, their whole shtick is you pay the premiums and then they don't cover you when something happens. So if that line of defense doesn't work for you, then that last and final line of defense is going to be your LLC, your corporation, your benefit corporation, whatever that legal entity is. And so that's kind of the backstop against any liability against you personally. And what I always say is, one is better than none, two is better than none, and obviously three is best. And there are, like I mentioned, small other things that you can do just sort of in between those steps to help protect yourself as well.
Okay, perfect. So 3 lines of defense. I do like that imagery. So contract, insurance, and then entity. So really quick with contract, because I talk about this with my clients, it doesn't have to be a 12-page contract. It can be something super simple, just saying like exactly what you said, outlining the expectations. And if there is a dispute, really briefly explaining maybe, how that would work. Is there anything that you see a lot of clients just missing in their contracts?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'll say sort of right off the bat with contracts is that it's not a one size fits all. You should definitely have a different type of contract for different types of situations. So even in the example, that I gave, an independent contractor agreement is what you should have in place with any of your contractors. If you have vendors and partners, that's going to be a different agreement, and it could even be different based on what they do for you or you do for them. And then, your customers, your clients, you definitely want a different agreement in place for them, because the other thing about agreements is that you can think of them as like a street. So some of them are one-way streets, like an NDA. Some of them are going to be two-way streets. Yeah, and so making sure that the flow of traffic, I guess, for lack of a better analogy here, is appropriate for the type of interaction that you're having. And I guess if there's something that I see missing most often from contracts, it's actually a lot of the stuff that people consider to be boilerplate legalese, which it is. It certainly is not something that you would think of off the top of your head if you're not a lawyer. But that language is typically going to be the most important language if you do get into a legal dispute, because it dictates sort of how you deal with that, who may be responsible for paying for certain things, where you fight that out. And so some of that stuff is tremendously important, but also is the most commonly overlooked because it's the most boring.
Right. There's a lot of words and it's small.
Right. Or in all caps, which is even worse.
Right. And then they're yelling at you through the paper.
Exactly.
Okay. So contracts, and I know that's like a very broad overview, but it's good for people to know, again, even just to know that they should have different types of contracts depending on the relationship and the service. And then number 2, insurance. And I tell people this too, because people think, well, I'm an independent contractor or a freelancer and I work from home. I have home insurance or renter's insurance, but why do they need separate business general liability insurance? What is that for?
Yeah, it's a good question. So with insurance, any type of insurance, it is extremely specific and narrow. And the reason for that is kind of what I said, that insurance companies love to collect premiums and then not pay out because of a technicality. And so, renter's insurance, for instance, renter's insurance will probably cover these fake twigs behind me and the mirror on the wall. Maybe I don't have it. So I don't even know. But it's certainly not going to cover if you had a customer or a client come by your home and they trip and fall, or if you have a image on a website that you create for a client, or you have a logo that you develop that is infringing on someone else. Certainly not going to be covered by any type of home insurance, and really would only be covered by a very specifically geared policy for digital type work, for those last examples at least.
Right. And I think also, I know for me, I've had some clients require that I have general liability insurance, which I remember when I first started thinking like, what am I doing that's, has any kind of, I was thinking of it as like a harmful, like a physical bodily threat, but there's a lot of different reasons why businesses should have them, even as freelancers and solopreneurs. So I think that's really important. So also I want to say hi, Colleen, who's also from Chicago. Thanks for joining us. So number 1, contracts, number 2, insurance, and number 3, entity. So I get asked this, I think, more than anything else, which is, should I be incorporated? And let's just start with the basics, because some people are thinking, I don't even know what that means. And I don't want to know what that means because it sounds complicated. What does it mean to be incorporated, at least here in the United States?
Yeah, for sure. And real quick on the insurance thing too, I wanted to mention that with the insurance questions and how sort of narrowly focused those have to be, it's always really important to make sure you have a good conversation like you would with myself with any insurance broker. And then in those contractual conversations, you might see that you need like workers' comp and like auto liability insurance. And that is actually a point of negotiation when you're working on a contract with a potential client, partner, or whatever, because a lot of the time, especially nowadays, if you're not going to be traveling anywhere, it might be prohibitive for you to go out and get an auto insurance policy for your business. And so there are ways to negotiate that away and change other parts of the contract to make sure you don't have to get those prohibitively expensive policies. But then onto the incorporation question. So with incorporation, it's actually incredibly confusing. The words that the law uses are all really unfortunate because incorporation is actually very specific to starting a corporation. And then organization is what you would do to start an LLC. So an LLC, a limited liability company, you would file articles of organization to start a limited liability company, and then you would file articles of incorporation to start a corporation. And those two are different. They have virtually the same liability protection for the owners, but they have very, very different internal structures and different annual requirements and costs.
Right. I know I'm a corporation and I file my taxes as an S-Corp. So even an S-Corp isn't actually an entity structure, it's a tax designation. So what's the difference between an LLC and, in broad terms anyways, and a corporation that files as an S-Corp, for example?
Yeah, so the difference is always going to be structural between those, and the S-Corp really only changes the tax treatment. The way that I like to put that is that you can always think of your business entity as state granted. And so the state gives you the structure, gives you the bones, and then the IRS will essentially give you how it's treated. And so, maybe a not so good example is like, if you get married, your tax treatment changes, right? And so you as an individual, when you start an entity, that may change your tax treatment, but if you file an S-Corp election, it absolutely will change the tax treatment of the entity. And so to kind of give the broad strokes on the differences between those two, LLC and corporation, it's a little easier to start with a corporation because a corporation is the more bureaucratic structure, so to speak. There's sort of shareholders at the top. They elect the board of directors who makes most of the decisions. The board of directors instructs the officers, and so like the president, CEO, those type, to carry those decisions out, who then also, give the marching orders to the rest of the staff. And that can be pretty wonky if you have like two owners that are also the board members and also the officers and also the staff. And so
I don't know why I'm a corporation, Sam, because you weren't my business attorney 10 years ago who told me to be a corporation. So I am all of the things. I have all of the titles, which sounds great, but it's not really.
Yeah, and there are ways to sort of limit the annual requirements about like shareholder meetings and board meetings with a corporation, which is something that we sometimes, and maybe we should talk about, but sometimes we recommend sort of if you're already in the corporate structure. But then for an LLC, the reason that it's easy to explain corporation first is that an LLC is much more simple. And the way that it's more simple is like where those shareholders would be, you have members in an LLC. Instead of called shareholders, they're called members. And then the members can also be the managers. So there's no board of directors, and the members can also be the officers like they would be in a corporation. And so essentially the member managers are the end all be all entire decision making sort of focus of the LLC. And so it's a much sort of less cumbersome structure for an LLC.
Yeah, I wish I had known that. I remember doing the research a few years ago and thinking, why did I not just be an LLC, which seems so much simpler? Debbie thinks I should get a raise, and I agree. Thank you. The board should tell the people to give me a raise.
Well, and that's actually one thing that an S-Corp election can help you with if you have an LLC, because since it's a tax election, you can apply it to an LLC or a corporation. And with an LLC, we're getting a little bit into the weeds on taxes here, but it's helpful. With an LLC, if you're a single member LLC, you actually still file your taxes for that business on your personal tax return.
Okay.
And then you also would file it as a partnership tax return if there's more than one owner of the LLC. Whereas if you file an S-Corp election for your LLC, you then file S-Corp taxes. And that also allows you to be on payroll so that you can give yourself a raise like Rachel needs to.
Right. I'm gonna get right on that now that I just paid some of my taxes. Okay, so I know there's even more nitty gritty, but the bottom line is that forming an entity helps protect your personal assets, keeps your business separate from that. But I know a lot of people that I talk to, some of my clients are like, oh yeah, I formed an LLC. And I'm like, and again, I think it depends on what state you are, what service you are. So what are some of the questions that we should be asking before we jump in and form an entity of some kind as a freelancer, consultant, solopreneur?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be two main questions that you want to ask just as to whether or not to form the entity. We can sort of get into where to form it in a second, but I think, one of the questions is going to be, is it necessary? A lot of the conversations I have are, is the risk of what you're doing worth the return on the expense to form it, and then also the annual requirements that you're opting in on if you're going to form an entity? Because if you go from a sole proprietor or a partnership without an entity, and then you file that entity, you're going to have annual taxes, annual filings, different things, sort of, on the government's radar now. So those are things that you have to pay attention to on an ongoing basis. And then also the name that you're going to use for the entity, especially if that name will also be the public-facing brand name, because one of the sort of ever-increasing areas that I practice in is going to be trademark, and most likely that's going to end up panning out in some type of infringement of a brand name or a logo, and that's just sort of an inherent evil right now because we're running out of words. And so you're seeing Hulu and Google and all these made-up words because you have to make something up to be what the USPTO calls arbitrary and fanciful. And the more arbitrary and fanciful, the less likely somebody else is using it. So vetting the name and then trying to figure out sort of whether or not it's even worth the entity costs and filings or the type of liability that you're subjecting yourself to with the type of business you do.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I also think it's important. There is again, depending on what state you live in, right, cost ratio benefit, where 3 years into my business, my accountant was like, you know what, you would have totally saved $5,000 on your taxes last year if you were an entity of some kind. And that's when I was like, what? Why hasn't anyone told me this? So, I mean, the cost benefit ratio for that year would have been worth it. And that's why I basically formed an entity right away and then enjoying some tax savings. But that was 3 years into my business. And I think a lot of people, especially, I know you and I have talked about this, for the most part, again, not across the board, but in California and New York, for example, where it is a little bit more expensive to become organized. Am I saying that right? Become organized or incorporated. It's actually also costs money to dismantle this thing. And so you don't want to jump into it. You really do want to figure out your specific circumstance, talk to an attorney, talk to an accountant, and together kind of form a decision, because it might not be in your best interest at first. Although I think if you're planning to have a business long term, you're eventually going to want to and need to do it.
And that's a great point too. I always say if conversation 1A is with me about whether or not to form something, 1B should be with your CPA right after that, because I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to taxes, but at the end of the day, your personal tax situation actually dictates a lot of what types of tax advantages you might get from formation, and even sometimes what type of entity to form.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Another question I get asked a lot is, especially from clients in California, are like, hey, I'm a digital nomad business. I do internet marketing or whatever it is. So I'm going to incorporate in Delaware or Nevada or another state that has more, favorable tax laws. Is that okay? How does that work? Can I just go in and incorporate anywhere?
Yeah, so you can. The short answer to that question is you can incorporate anywhere. There's really nothing stopping you from doing that, because at the end of the day, you have to remember that all of what we're talking about, basically all of my job, is helping people sort out all of the different things that the government makes money off of when we make money. So they're not going to stop you from paying them filing fees in Delaware or Nevada or any of these other states. Right. And so part of the problem with that is that the government is never going to dispel any confusion or any myths around those types of things either. And so a lot of the traditional way things are structured in the legal world are really just the product of tradition and sort of what was standard. And so, like, even yourself, doing a corporation, the corporation was the original business entity that existed for many decades. The LLC is actually relatively young. It's only a few decades old. And so a lot of attorneys are pretty reluctant to even go with it anymore for their clients because it's so new, and new meaning like about my age. And so it's kind of crazy, but
21.
Yeah, totally. I'll take that. I've had this beard probably since 21. I think the main thing that I like to say about the other states for the formation is that the end result of that is going to be that you are most likely listed as a resident of another state, right? So no matter what kind of digital nomad you are, and look, don't get me wrong, if you are living abroad, this question is a little bit easier, and you can essentially just put your finger on a map and pick a state because you're not actually a resident in any state, presumably. And so if you are a resident, though, the problem that you might run into is that if you register in Delaware, for instance, which Delaware S-Corp is sort of the traditional go-to, is really motivated by investment. So like a Delaware S-Corp is very advantageous and appealing to investors. And we're talking like VCs and big investors, which makes all of the costs worth it. But at the end of the day, the benefits that you get from a Delaware registration really are only for the investors. There's a quicker court for them, and it also has some more favorable investor type laws. But then also, if you live in Delaware, you actually get a little bit of a tax break. But if you don't, none of those benefits actually benefit you as the business owner, which you should be doing what's best for you, as the owner. And so then to add insult to injury, so to speak, if you register in Delaware, but you're a resident of California, sooner or later, if you're reporting your taxes as a resident of California and you're reporting income from that business, California is going to look at that and say, hey, we make money when you make money, and you're not reporting any income from this business being here, and you are. So you're going to get some fines and penalties for the years you didn't have it registered, and you need to register it. So you end up doubling up on the filings, the fees, the annual maintenance. Not to say that you shouldn't do that if you have investors that want it or something along those lines, but it is sort of the way that I like to put it, and pardon my profanity, but it's just more shit to forget.
Yeah, total. Well, that's so true. Profanity allowed. And I think, I think the important thing is just, again, I come back to this. It's so personalized to who you are, what your situation is. Like, I don't have investors. I'm not going after investors, but if I was, maybe that would be an interesting option, and maybe it would be worth it to have to file in 2 states. But I think, Colleen says California makes everything difficult. It's true.
I don't disagree.
But I think it also just recognizing that, yes, depending on the state you're living in might make it difficult, like California, but then there's also other benefits we get from filing in the state that you live in. And so, I do also have friends that have moved out of state because they knew they wanted to form a business and they were going to be a resident of another state, which is, an option as well. But that brings me to kind of another question, which is, a lot of people now, we have LegalZoom, which is this amazing online service. And I always try to point my clients in the direction of an actual real life flesh and blood attorney because of all these nuances that we're talking about. And, I'm not going to ask you what you think, obviously, because I think you have a very clear opinion of being a business attorney. But I know you have examples of people that use LegalZoom or a similar service to form their entity or organization, and then had to come back and you had to kind of clean up the mess that was made. Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I think, LegalZoom, there's also Stripe Atlas, Rocket Lawyer. There's a whole bunch of them. I shouldn't give everybody all the names of all these kind of competing forces, but they're great sometimes for specific things, very narrow things, because of the point that you brought up, which is that the most important aspect of what a lawyer does is reading between the lines and what you're taught in law school, which is issue spotting. And so a lot of what we've talked about already on this call is the nuanced issues that we are trained to spot, and only can spot from experience in seeing other clients make missteps and mistakes along the way. And so, we joke that we should have a fixed LegalZoom package because what they do is fine, and it is typically going to be all sort of like legally compliant, and I would say minimally compliant. But the problem that you run into is that, for instance, circumstances change. So I have a client that I've been working with now for a few years, and when they came to us, they'd used a LegalZoom for a Delaware S-Corp. Oh, there goes that light, like I told you might happen during this. So they came to us after working with LegalZoom, and they had set up a corporation in Delaware, and they didn't, maybe expect to raise money from investors. They weren't sure sort of what the future looked like. Okay. And so we've had to really, really do a lot of work to unravel and undo and then replace the things that they had in place from LegalZoom. And it's actually caused them a pretty significant delay when it comes to their investment. And so it's actually holding up their investors right now. And this particular client is pretty I don't know what the terminology I'm looking for, but they're looking at investment from like a ton of celebrities that you and I would know if I mentioned their names, and
Got
it's holding them up right now because we have to file with Delaware again to unravel a bunch of this stuff, then file with California to remedy it after we fix it in Delaware.
Yeah. That would be so frustrating if you're trying to launch something, get it off the ground, and now you're delayed because of bureaucracy. That would absolutely drive me crazy. Okay, so I know we have people joining us from all over, but I quickly want to talk about AB5, switch gears a little bit, because it's causing a lot of panic, I think, among the freelance community, and B, as California does, a lot of states do. So I think that even if people aren't in California, they should just be aware of this thing that might come down and really what it means, because I think there's more fear associated around it than there needs to be. Can we just talk about what is AB5 and what are the implications for freelancers?
Yeah, and I'll start there because there's nothing more accurate than the statement that there's a lot more fear and precaution, prudence and reluctance than there is actual legal implications of this law. Not to say that this law isn't far-reaching and a very significant change to our independent contractor rules that we had previously, and so to not bore everyone to death and make them tune off of this webinar, but we used to have an 8 to 11 factor test. It is the federal test for independent contractors, and it was a sliding scale. So you had to satisfy more factors than not to then properly classify someone as a contractor.
Now, versus a W-2 employee.
Exactly, versus an employee, which employees come with significantly more just like cost, expense, liability, all of the things.
There's lots of benefits for an employer to have an independent contractor versus a W-2 employee.
Totally. And so, this AB5 law, this was, it grew out of a court case called Dynamex that was in California a couple years ago. Trucking company that had all of their drivers in certain uniforms on certain schedules, followed certain directions. Yeah. And so those drivers ended up suing, and they got the decision from the court that they should have been employees, meaning that they should have gotten those rest breaks, meal breaks, benefits, things like that. Yeah, and so then Lorena Fletcher Gonzalez, one of the politicians in our state legislature, she put together AB5, which to her demise potentially, but also to her credit, depending on how you look at this, she did this to protect independent contractors that have been taken advantage of and don't get benefits and all of those breaks. And so this new law makes it a 3-factor test, and it is an all or nothing test. It's not a sliding scale anymore. And it makes it very, very much more difficult to classify someone as a contractor. And then to make it even woefully more confusing, there are several layers to this law, and there are still sometimes where the old test is used. There are modified versions of the old test that are used. There are exceptions for different professions. But what I boil it down to with this is that if your contractor does something that isn't core to your business, and they have a business license, and they do this for one other person in addition to yourself, you should be okay.
Perfect.
Classifying you as a contractor instead of an employee.
Yeah, and as us as independent contractors, making sure we aren't required to go into a client's office every day, right? We have our own office. We keep our own schedule. We're not micromanaged in a way of people are telling us what to do every second of the day. I think that's a really good one. Also having one other client that you're doing this work for that they don't have in-house or don't have the capacity, at least in-house, they might have similar functions.
Right. And that's a hard conversation in and of itself to try to determine what is core to a business. I mean, if you think about even the work that you do several different types of consulting depending on which client you're talking to. Yeah. And so depending on who you would loop in to do some of the stuff that you might do as a business owner, is that core to what you do? And so there's a lot of uncertainty that goes with this new law as well. And that's part of the reason why you'll see there's a lot of like torches lit and sort of venom in the independent contractor industry, because they are now seeing that people are pulling their work, and it's not necessarily due to the letter of the law. It's due to the fear and the reluctance of those that are contracting.
That's what makes me sad, because I'm like, it's actually, I know for me, like people were like, oh my gosh, AB5, are you okay, Rachel? And I was like, I looked at the thing. I think I asked you about it. And it was like, no, it's fine. Like it's the same as what I've been doing for 10 years and for what most of my new clients are going to be doing. But like I said in the beginning, I think it's been blown up in a way or just miscommunicated in a way. And so I appreciate you kind of breaking it down a little bit. But obviously people can do their own research and also either talk to you or talk to someone, in their own area in California. But again, I know there's the potential that this could go to other states. So I just wanted people to be aware of it.
And that's the part too, is that it is very much specific to the role, because even like there may be some clients of yours that what you do for them over the last 10 years now isn't permitted, right? And so, or you have to look at whichever exception or test that it has. And yeah, I mean, Biden has said he's a fan of it. And so it could end up being something that kind of ends up being national. And so definitely something to keep an eye on. And certainly if you hire contractors in California, even if like some of our viewers, you're not in California, it may reach into your compliance as well.
Right. If your contractor lives in California, for example.
Yep.
Okay. Good to know. I know that a lot of people right now during COVID and just there's a lot of people trying to give back right now. And I even have a client who we ran a contest or a charity a contest or a giveaway on social media. And we had sweepstakes rules and other things. But I think people in their effort to do good and help people at a time that's really hard aren't necessarily taking all the compliance steps that they should. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And this is one of those where it's like, I do not want to rain on the parade. I do not want to be a naysayer when people are trying to give back and do good out there. But unfortunately, there are significant penalties for some of this stuff. And so sweepstakes and giveaways, for instance, there actually are two types. I guess giveaways would be the overarching term. And then there's sweepstakes and contests. And the reason that it's so important to distinguish between those two is that if you add an unintended or you mistakenly add an element to either one of those, it can be actually an illegal lottery. And only governmental agencies are allowed to run lotteries. And so that then makes it a very steep penalty, because anytime you infringe on what the government only can do, you can get in a lot of trouble. And so it has to either be a contest or a sweepstakes. One involves chance, that's the sweepstakes. Contest involves some type of skill, and then that has to be reflected in the terms of the giveaway, or of the giveaway. I'll use as the general term. You have to reflect sort of what the prize values are, whether or not skill is required, what the selection of the winners includes, what the term is, when the awards will be given, all of these things. And then, and depending on how the giveaway is presented, there even is sort of depending on the situation, like you have to mail out the terms. That's sort of a yesteryear thing for elderly people, probably not relevant on like social media. And then the other one is giveaways, where you like sell a product or a service and then you donate a portion of that, or you give some products away and then donate as well to a nonprofit. That is also a regulated activity, usually called cause marketing or commercial co-ventures. But anytime you're essentially like selling something and advertising to the public that the sales of that will benefit a charity, you most likely need to do a registration and some compliance. And the penalties for that are even steeper, because given that a charity is involved, the government wants to ensure that that money does go to the charity. And so not doing the registration, or not actually doing the donation comes with some pretty hefty penalties there too. So
that's something they could do with a business attorney.
Definitely, yeah. So we'll help you sort of sort through like how to structure these things to avoid the compliance if it's at all possible. Sometimes if truly all you do is want to just donate and you don't necessarily need to advertise to the public that a portion of the proceeds from this product or service, then just do it. Don't advertise it. You don't have to register. You don't have to, do the financial reporting and the annual renewals of that registration. And sometimes in these situations, you have to put up a bond. So there's some things called a commercial fundraiser where you actually interact with the public on behalf of a nonprofit to raise money. And in those situations, you have to put up like a $25,000 bond in order to do that in compliance.
Yeah, it just feels hard to give things away. So basically, it's kind of like, I think there's a verse in the Bible about like, do good things in secret. I'm sure I'm butchering that. But yeah, maybe if you want to do good, do it, but don't do it as a marketing PR tactic, because then there's a lot of compliance things.
Unfortunately, I don't want to have to agree with that, but I do.
So I want to take a question real quick. This came in from Lillian. What about a personal chef? This was when we were talking about AB5. What about a personal chef that uses, I think, other people on occasion? I'm assuming like a sous chef, or maybe they have like someone helping them serve. I'm assuming, Lillian, you're asking kind of how would that work as far as independent contractors, or let us know if there's something more specific you have with that.
Yeah, if that one's related to independent contractors, what I would say is that I'm not sure if there's a specific exemption for chefs or in the culinary industry, but with an example that is somewhat related. So let's say a photographer. A photographer typically has second shooters, and that sure is cool what they do. And there is an exception for that specifically where they can have second shooters for a certain number of events throughout a year. And there's actually an amendment that's supposed to be working its way through the state legislature in California that would actually relax the number of times that they're limited to helping. And so there may be a similar exemption for chefs. But with that, what I would say is that so long as the people that the chef contracts out to, which is how I understand this question to mean, then if those sous chefs, if they have their own business license and they operate as a sous chef for other chefs on occasion, should be fine. Now, I say should because not only is this law very uncertain, but there's also been very little challenges to it because of the state of the world. And we don't yet have a lot of sort of court or enforcement actions to look to determine fully sort of what it's going to play out in specific situations like that. But should be fine, assuming the factors that I laid out.
Perfect. So make sure that whoever you're contracting out with, they have their own business license and that they're doing what they're doing for you with at least one other person.
Exactly.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Lillian, hopefully that answered your question. If anyone else has questions as we wrap up, we'll wrap up in a little bit. I just have a couple more questions for Sam while we have you here. I know we're a little bit over time, but I did want to ask you about, because I have a lot of clients that are creative professionals, either, whether they're copywriters or graphic designers. What kind of protection should they have around their work from a copyright trademark perspective?
Yeah, great question. And there's really sort of two sides to trademark and copyright. And so quickly, trademark is going to be a source identifier. So my shirt has a little logo on the pocket there.
Yep.
That would be the source identifier, Nike, Swoosh, Lacoste, Alligator. And then copyright is going to be an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium. There's your statutory definition for the day. And so that's going to be like, when J.K. Rowling came up with Harry and Hogwarts, not protectable, when she wrote it into a book, that book becomes something she can copyright. So there's the side of protecting it. So, doing your due diligence to make sure no one's using your trademark before you start using it, and then filing a trademark application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the USPTO. That will help you protect it in all 50 states, which then means, that anyone using that name for the same products or services, because that's an important distinction. There can be Nike and Nike plumbing, because plumbing is not the same as like products that Nike makes, unless they branch into plumbing and buy out the plumber. But
and this is important with my clients when we talk about naming their business, because we always do a USPTO search and make sure, again, exactly what we're talking about. Is it in the same industry? Could it be, is it a completely different service? And it might be okay in that case.
Yeah, and trademark's tough too, because the USPTO relies on something called a commercial impression. So, for instance, like we had an application once that we filed for Black Diamond Casino for an app that was a slot machine app, and there was a Black Diamond registration for actual physical slot machines. And these are in two different trademark classes, and our client got rejected, and we argued, a lot of different things, and it didn't fly. So the commercial impression can get you rejected as well, even though the mark might be different. And then copyright, that's the U.S. Copyright Office, same deal. You'll need to register with them to protect things. Their sort of segment of what you can register is interesting, because I've run into a lot of situations recently where we have things that we want to look to register and we might not be able to because they don't fall into the categories that copyright permits. But protections on the front end, but then there's also making sure that you don't get in trouble for trademark and copyright, which is somewhat of a similar conversation. The same search that you would do to make sure that your trademark or copyright is something that isn't already registered is the same search that would reveal someone else using that, so that you then don't go use it. And copyright's the one that branches a little bit more into this, because copyright is something that, for instance, if you pull an image from the internet, if you pull someone's copy from the internet, whatever there is out there, I think we kind of forget nowadays that, social media included, everything that we post, if we didn't take that photo or we didn't draw it or create it, it's someone's copyright. And so, unless there's a specific, you and I were talking recently about Creative Commons, unless there's a specific type of license that allows you to use it commercially, you could get in trouble for that.
Yeah, well, I recently, Sam, as you know, had to deal with this because I thought in 2013 that you could pull an image off the internet as long as I credited AP Images and that it would be fine. I used it in a blog post and recently got in trouble for that and had to pay some fines, which Sam helped me settle and not pay more fines. So thank you for that. But yeah, I think that was an important lesson. And I think in this digital age, recognizing just because it's out there, it still has protections. You can't just use it. Make sure you're kind of going through the right steps to use it, whether it's in a social media post or a blog post or your own, product or service, whatever you're selling. So
yeah,
just be careful about that. I know Debbie says ugh. I know, Debbie. I know. So
well,
maybe you're using, free stock image sites or paying for the images that you're using, for example. And obviously, we never thought. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word. When you copy someone's writing.
Oh, plagiarism.
Plagiarism. Gosh. Tuesday brain. We never thought plagiarism was okay, but now more than ever, I think it's easy to steal, copy and paste stuff. And we want to be really, really, really careful about that.
Yeah. And there's the sort of age-old myth of like attributing credit to wherever you got that. Yeah. Actually, that's just going to create a quicker trail of breadcrumbs to you for them to come after you. And so I'm certainly not saying don't attribute. What I'm saying is ask them for a license if you want to use that image, and then you can attribute it to them with their permission. And I mean, look, we're not even getting into some really crazy stuff that can happen where, like, if anybody out there watching this is a photographer or an illustrator or someone that creates designs, if you post that on Instagram, there are certain rules with Instagram that allow then other outfits and people and companies to embed that image on their site in a blog post without repercussion. So the opposite of what we're talking about, where by virtue of posting it through a social media site that has some weird rules, you actually give up rights to your own copyright.
Gosh, I know. I think about photographers a lot. I have friends that actually run a business helping train other photographers. And I know they talk about that because it's like, hey, be careful when you post for your own marketing purposes, whether it's, especially on Instagram, I know for sure, but even some of the other platforms, you're essentially saying this is common domain, not to use a legal term, but yeah. Wow. Okay, Sam, well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I just wanted to let people know you have a ton of free resources that you give, kind of like this, but you have videos and other things. Where can people access some of those things?
Yeah, for sure. So our website's www.inbetterwetrust.com, and we have a blog on there, BLAWG, and that will have a lot of our like written articles. It'll also have some of the videos that are on our YouTube, and so that'll also take you to our YouTube, which is just Better APC's YouTube channel. And we have, I think, close to 80 videos on there right now. I'm actually going straight from this video to record more videos for the YouTube.
Perfect.
And so that's anything from nonprofits to agreements to trademarks to copyright to freelancers to contractors to some of this giveaway stuff we talked about. We also, anybody that works with us knows that we really try to double down on those resources when you're working with us. And so you'll get videos that help explain different things that we deliver to you, as well as different sort of materials and infographics that help explain stuff. And so really for us, I think, it's not the whole ivory tower bullshit that most lawyers are, back here and they retain all their knowledge and tell you what to do and don't tell you why. And for us, we want to share this knowledge and get it out there. And so really, by all means, like, reach out to us at Birdie. That's our fictional mascot. He's a hedgehog. He's not who will write you back. It'll probably be me or our paralegal. But if you want to reach out to us there, we do free consultations. And we're really happy to just share anything that we think can be helpful, even if that's just something right off the cuff that we're not going to bill for, or even if you don't need a consultation, we can give you the resource you need without that.
Perfect. I love that. Well, I always end these things with two last questions. Are you ready? They're personal questions.
Fire away.
What makes you feel free?
Lately, it's going on long bike rides. I've got an electric assist bike, and I get up to like 30, 40-mile rides, and it just, I don't know if it's the autonomy of being out self-propelled with the battery. It's got a motor, but and just sort of being out in the world and cruising around. I love that, and it does very much clear my mind and make me feel like I'm kind of out there and free and doing whatever the hell I want.
I love it. And then lastly, what is bringing you joy right now?
That's definitely one thing that's bringing me joy. I also am kind of a nerd when it comes to an audiobook fictional series that I love. It's called the Dresden Files, and it's
Oh,
they
I've heard
released, so they released the 16th book in the series after a 6-year break this past Tuesday. So not today, but last week. And my brother and I have been like collectively listening to it and rationing off the chapters. And the plan was to finish it over the course of a month. And we've only got about an hour left in the 14th. So
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, Sam, thank you again so much for your time, for just all of your wisdom that you're sharing with us, again, for free. Check out Sam's resources on inbetterwetrust.com. Like he said, he does free consultations. He does awesome videos. I get them as one of his clients. And so, yeah, just appreciate you. Thanks for all you're doing. And if people have questions, they can reach out to you or reach out to me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this and for having me.
Okay. Bye, guys.